Let's take a look at the input generation and flattened schema creation processes. This visual might be one of my favorite parts of this entire session. Keep in mind, I've been educating developers about PMax for a long time, and nothing, in my opinion, more clearly demonstrates the components of a PMax campaign from a developer's perspective than this simple JSON schema. You can use a different mechanism or data structure for defining your PMax campaigns, but I like the idea of using JSON here because it is declarative, easy to understand, and language agnostic. Although I've made a big deal out of this visual, it's not a major breakthrough. In fact, this very closely resembles the structure of the resources you'd normally need to create in the PMax campaign creation process, but with a few key differences. First, our schema abstracts complexity present in the Google Ads API that we need not define for Performance Max campaigns, either because they're not related to PMax or the values are required constants in PMax. The Google Ads API was designed to be flexible and extensible, so you don't need a different campaign resource for each type of campaign. And this is exactly why we can use many of the same resources that you've come to know and love when managing Performance Max campaigns via API. However, some fields like discovery campaign settings are completely irrelevant for the sake of PMax, and others like advertising channel type will always be populated with the same value, which is Performance Max in our case. Second, in this schema, we are nesting resources associated with asset groups inside of the asset group objects, namely asset group assets, asset group signals, and asset group listing group filters. In the Google Ads API, these items are unique resources with their own resource names, and they are linked to asset groups via reference. As a quick side note, I won't be discussing asset group listing group filters in this session. Given their complexity and the amount of content we'll be going through, there just wasn't enough time. We have a thorough guide and a dedicated video on our YouTube channel if you want to learn more about working with asset group listing group filters in the context of PMax campaigns. Back to the schema design. I like this nested structure because it's easy to get a full picture of an asset group at a glance. Along those same lines, I'm hoping this view is a bit more intuitive. You'll also see later that structuring your resources in this way can greatly simplify resource name construction and management, especially when using temporary IDs in bulk mutate requests. Remember, this is required when linking assets to asset groups using asset group assets, because asset groups must meet all minimum asset requirements at the time of creation. That brings me to the next difference between this schema and the Google Ads API, which is this asset group info object here. This field may already be generating some questions for our highly astute viewers because the concept of asset group info doesn't exist in the Google Ads API. I made this field up for this schema as a way to encapsulate all of the assets associated with an asset group. Again, I found this made things a little easier to understand at a glance. Using this field will also help us process and validate our data in a later step. In addition, I should point out two asset field types that don't exist in the Google Ads API: short headlines and short descriptions. These address a special asset requirement that I'll cover a bit later when we discuss validation. The last difference I'm going to call out is what I'm calling the flattening of certain resources, which is where the schema gets its name. Perhaps simplifying is a better word, but we're effectively reducing these resources to their simplest forms. For example, our asset group signals are organized by type in each asset group's signals field. Each asset group signal can either be an audience or a search theme. Audiences are represented by a list of audience resource names, and the search themes field is a list of text strings, the actual search themes. You may also notice that our conversion goals are a list of category and origin pairs. I'll go through this later, but the process of setting campaign level conversion goals can be a bit involved. At the end of the day, we simply need to define which category and origin pairs we want as goals for our specific campaign. Explicitly listing these seemed like a much simpler and easier approach. Then, we'll just add some boilerplate logic to do the processing later on. The asset group info field is structured as a key value pair, with the key being the asset field type, which is set when creating an asset group asset. The value of each asset field type is a list of strings. Each string in the list will contain either an asset resource name if the asset has already been uploaded, or information about the asset if it hasn't. If that asset hasn't already been created, we'll create it on the fly after checking it meets the specifications for the given field type. If the asset is a text asset, such as a headline, this will be the text of the asset. If it's an image asset, the string will be an image URL. There are, of course, other ways to process and upload images, but this seemed like a simple mechanism for the sake of demonstration. I should also point out that for the sake of simplicity, asset group info only includes the asset field types that are required to create a valid asset group. However, I would encourage you to include additional asset types if you can to help with ad performance.